right, so I am back from my Thanksgiving break, and, well, to be honest, I can already feel things slowing down for the holidays. I don't know about you guys, but it's starting to feel like everybody is a little tired from all of the crazy hardware releases and rumors from this year. We're just ready to start resting up and preparing for another crazy year that will see the release of AMD's Phoenix, mobile Raptor Lake products, and I'm sure tons of RDNA 4, Blackwell, and, well, we'll see what happens with Battlemage rumors next year. In fact, I would have probably taken all of December off if it wasn't for the fact that, well, AMD has decided to launch their next generation of graphics cards halfway through the last month of the year. And so I guess I'm just going to keep working. You know, it's funny. I'm really glad that I scheduled an atypical podcast episode for release this week, one with Hogue of Hogue's Law, to take a legal look at a lot of the recent stories, because if it wasn't for an atypical set of subjects, I'm not sure what we talk about. There's not that much to discuss. It seems like we're all just waiting in the eye of the storm before RDNA 3 launches, then we can head off to a Christmas vacation. Well, when I look around, though, on the forums right now and on the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, the number one thing I'm seeing people talk about this week, besides falling prices, of course, is the RTX 4070. The 4090 has launched, the 4080 has launched, and RDNA 3 is about to launch, and all these products are really expensive. And this is coming on the heels of Nvidia unlaunching the 4080 12GB after everyone gasped at the actual benchmarks of a card Nvidia was going to try to sell for $900. Yes, a lot of cool new products are coming out this year from both AMD and Nvidia, but all of them are really expensive, and I'm seeing a lot of people online ask, will the 4070 be reasonably priced? When will it come out? What will it look like? And is it worth waiting for? Well, if you're curious about the 4070, the first thing I would say is, well, I put out a leak a little over a month ago that showed you what it looked like. And that leak came from people who have access to the 4070 in NVIDIA's labs. They were mostly involved in the thermal testing, so they don't know everything. And to be honest, besides being based on 8104, which is the die the 4080 12GB was going to use, things haven't really been finalized yet, at least as of when that video came out. And I was told that thing was months away from release, at least based on what stage it was in testing in NVIDIA's labs. But that was almost 2 months ago. So are we getting close to a 4070 launch? The answer is maybe. I'm pretty sure there will be a firm laptop launch of the 4070 early next year that will get at least a paper launch of the RTX 4070 to desktop by March, and that actually we could see all of the above launch in January. It's just that the specs haven't quite been finalized, the naming isn't quite finalized, but it's pretty close. And I think I know enough to tell you guys to give some advice on who should wait for this graphics card. And unfortunately, my answer is, I don't think almost anybody should. And I'm actually going to stay away from going through insider info too much and just use publicly available information to demonstrate why the RTX 4070, in a best case scenario, and even its competition from AMD, a 7700 XT and 7800 XT, though they might be a decent option by the time they're out, that if you need a graphics card now, they just are not worth waiting for. But first, an ad from a sponsor. This piece of content is brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends, a fantasy RPG that centers around the world of Teleria that has had a dark shadow cast over it by the Dark Lord Siroth. You are here to save it by collecting and then summoning from your collection a set of heroes that you control in both PvE and, if you want, PvP battles that also includes clan support. There are dozens of heroes to collect, like Herndig, the kind of dwarf that excels as a nuker that hits single enemies with immense damage, or a utility hero like Mithrala, Lifebane, who can poison, hex, debuff enemies, or buff her own allies. And this month is a huge one for Raid. They just released a brand new faction, the Sylvan Watchers, with some amazing new champions, Forest Elves, and Druids Phase. They're all here, and if that's not enough, Raid's got a full lineup of events, along with a new season of the Forge Pass, And Amazon Prime members get exclusive rewards now, and anyone else who wants to champion Vergies, an energy refill, 200,000 silver, an XP boost, and an ancient shard can click on the link in the description to support Moore's Law is Dead and get $30 worth of gear. Scanning the on-screen QR code or clicking the link in the description and using this offer really does help Moore's Law is Dead directly. It also helps you get some cool bonuses if you're interested in Raid Shadow Legends. If you are, support Moore's Law is Dead by scanning that QR code or clicking the link in the description and trying out Raid Shadow Legends today. All right, like I said before the break, I decided not to hammer sources too hard on this one because I think when a video is mostly about opinion, sometimes it's best to just use publicly available information so there's really no argument or mystery around it. And the fact of the matter is, the two main things that would influence if someone should wait for a 4070 would be what's its performance going to be and what's it's going to cost, especially with regards to a mid-range or high-end product, because when you're talking about the 4090, the question of if you should get it basically comes down to, well, do you want the best and are you willing to pay for it? Once you start getting into the mid-range, it's not about if, it's about if it's worth it, because it's not going to be stronger than the previous generation, which, let's be very clear about this. My sources from that I used for that 4070 early leak were pretty conflicted on this notion that Nvidia was just going to rebrand the 4080 12GB they unlaunched as a 4070 or 4070 Ti. That while they may use the full die for some sort of mobile 4080 or 4080 Ti for laptop, that it was unlikely they would use the full die in the exact same configuration the 4080 12GB was for desktop, because that would be admitting that they just rebranded the 4080 and it should have always been a 4070 or 4070 Ti. So I think the most likely scenario is any 4070 or 4070 Ti, even if it gets 12 gigabytes of RAM, will have a couple SMs disabled, or at least be constrained to a lower TDP than what the 4080 12GB was going to be. But I think at the minimum, what we can say is the best case scenario for 4070 or 4070 Ti performance is the performance that we already know the 4080 12GB was going to have before it was unlaunched by Nvidia. And if we look at the charts they put out, which proved very close to what we saw in benchmarks for the 4080 16GB, I mean, yeah, guys, we know what this is. The full AD 104, which is the best case scenario for like a 4070, is going to be around the performance of a 3080 Ti with a little bit better ray tracing and less power usage. That's it. Add DLSS 3 support. That is what the 4070 will be. So we know it's not bringing any new tiers of performance to the table. It's going to be the performance of not even the best flagships from last gen, most likely. It's probably not going to beat the 3090 Ti, even when you turn ray tracing on in most games. So if the best case scenario for 4070 performance is just what the 4080 12GB was going to be, and that's the best case scenario, what's the best case scenario for pricing? Well, the way I went about thinking of this question was, let's just look at what the biggest pricing gaps were in the past with Nvidia between their 80 and 70 class cards. Like, what's the biggest difference they've ever had before? And I think we should probably limit it to Fermi or the GTX 400 series or later, because before that, I don't want to get into it. I would argue you shouldn't compare those generations to the more modern ones. So if we look at the biggest pricing gaps between an 80 and 70 class card in recent Nvidia memory, we can see that the 780 to the 770 was $399 divided by 649.615. We multiply that by $1,200, the MSRP of the 4080. That would give you a 4070 that is $738. Well, it's gotten crazier though. Let's look at the 980 to the 970. 329 divided by 549. That'd be 0.6. That gets you to a price gap that would give you $719 based on how the 4080 is priced now. But it gets crazier than that as well. The craziest one I could find was actually Pascal. And I even made it a little silly. If we go with the non-founders MSRP of the 1070, $379, we divide that by the founders pricing of the 1080, which was $699, you get to 0.54, multiply that by the 4080, you get to $650. That is the biggest gap I could find in recent memory. And I even used the founders for the 1080 and the non-founders for the 1070. If you apply that logic to the 4080 pricing, the 4070 shouldn't cost less than $650. Heck, if I even use the price gap between the Titan RTX and the 2080 Ti, which isn't 80 to 70, but just for fun, I looked at it, you would get to $576 for the price of a 4070. So I will say this, there's kind of a trend here. The gap in the 900 series was bigger than the gap in the 700, and the gap in the 1000 series is bigger than the gap in the 900, but the gap wasn't as pronounced with Turing, where they had the $600 2070 and the $800 2080, and it wasn't as big with Ampere as well. So, well, there seemed to be a trend, and you could argue maybe this will be the biggest gap in history. Maybe they'll make it cost half as much as the 4080. I think we should all admit that if the 4070 managed to cost $600, that would be an unprecedented price gap between the 70 and 80 class, especially when I consider what the cost of this card to produce probably is. My understanding from the sources I've talked to is that the 4080 12GB would have had a BOM cost that's a little less than what the 3080 10GB was, right? It has a smaller die that uses less energy, but it's more expensive silicon, and it had more RAM than the 3080. Its BOM cost was pretty similar, maybe a little less, and I leaked that in my Ultimate Play video years ago. And also, this has been just publicly backed up by EVGA, saying that they couldn't profit with 3080s with decent coolers, well, actually above $600. So I don't know what anyone else is saying. I've seen some people argue about what it could cost online. I'm going to stick by my sources here. Nvidia was going to want to charge $600 for the 4070, at least I believe. And at best, it's going to perform like a 3080 Ti or 6900 XT. And so maybe you're seeing where I'm going with this. Right now, you don't need to wait months. You can get a 6800 XT 16GB graphics card for around $550 or less. Although I will say the close to $500 options are selling out quickly. Or you could get an RX 6800 16GB for $500, or a 3060 Ti for $350. Heck, I just bought an RX 6700 10GB card for $330 for a build I'm doing for a friend this Christmas. If you want the best, the 4090 is out there, and RDNA 3 is going to get close to 4090 performance, at least in rasterization, for those who want laughably great 4K performance to game above 120 Hz. But for everyone else, for someone that just wants a mid-range or high-end card, it does not make sense to wait for a 4070 when you can get the same performance with as much or more RAM right now. It just doesn't make sense. I think there's a good reason that 6900 XT that came with games on AMD.com, brand new for only $679, there's a reason that sold out. I think most people realized when they saw $1,200 for the 80 class that a best case scenario for the 70 class from Nvidia was going to be like $700. And look, honestly, I think the best case scenario for the 4070 or 4070 Ti, whatever they call it, is that they launch something around $600 that is about as good as a 3080 Ti. But is that worth waiting months for? No. And remember, Nvidia may decide to make this $750 perform like a 3080 12GB. I just don't think so. I don't think there's any reason to wait for the 4070. And so, I don't know. I guess the last thing someone might ask now is, well, what about AMD's offerings? Look, no promises, but from what I'm hearing from my contacts at AMD, there isn't a rush to launch other cards right now. When it comes to the 7800 XT, I think we know what it's going to be. Whether it's based on Navi 31 with 16 gigs or Navi 32 with 16 gigs of RAM, it's going to be 10 to 30% weaker than the 7900 XT, which is going to place it around 6950 XT performance, which is around 4070, probably a little better than 4070 performance. If you look at where the 7900 XT is priced, it's probably going to be $600 to $750, which again means you're going to get something, I guess, a little better than now for a little more than what you can spend right now. Not worth waiting for. Now, does that mean I'm going to hate the 7800 XT, 7700 XT, and 4070 when they come out if they're, kind of close to what I'm expecting now? It doesn't necessarily mean I will hate them. If the 7800 XT comes out, beats the 6950 XT for $700, I'll probably recommend that over a 6950 XT for $650. I'd say pay the extra $50, get the newest generation that uses less energy and has a little better performance. But that doesn't mean it will be bad advice if you decided to get something pretty close to that now and have something fun to game with all Christmas break. I think maybe in a best case scenario, the 4070 will be okay. But if the best case scenario is okay, and it's not going to be any stronger than what you can buy right now, and it's probably not going to be any cheaper, don't wait. Don't wait for the 4070. Don't wait for the 7800 XT. If you want cutting edge performance, the 7900 XTX and 4090 are there. But for everyone else, the prices of last gen products are really low, and I do not think there is any reason to wait. And yeah, that's going to just about do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to get something out at the beginning of this week, something to catch me up to speed on what's going on out there. And what's going on out there is really, really cheap pricing on products that are out already, and that waiting just seems silly to me. It's not to say things couldn't get a little better, but are they going to get better enough that it's worth waiting? I don't think so. And yeah, well, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, please share it, please subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel, and please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you were a supporter on Patreon, last week you would have been able to submit questions for the recent broken silicon. You'd have gotten it early and ad-free. You'll be getting a die shrink later this week that only patrons get access to. There's a lot of premium ad-free content out there for the people that make this channel possible. Don't forget to support if you can. But for everyone else, thank you for watching.